Okay, everybody. So now we are starting the recording of the webinar. It's the fourth webinar in our series on Fortum Uniper, and today we would like to discuss the coal supply chain because we have discussed the Datteln 4 plant, the coal phase-out discussion in Germany. We have discussed the gas infrastructure. We have discussed the coal phase-out in the Netherlands and the possible ECT claim threat. And today we would like to have a closer look at the coal supply chain of both companies, because before that we've mainly spoken about Uniper-related topics. And by the way, could you please mute yourself during the presentations, because that would be lovely. Otherwise, we will hear people typing or reading all the time, so that would be great. We could also mute everybody, but if you couldn't do it on your own, that would be better. So we had to change the presentation, so Vladimir has to start because he has to leave at 6:30. So he will give an introduction. He will share his knowledge about coal mining in Russia, especially in the Kuzbass region. And I will then continue with a presentation on the situation or on the coal supply of both companies, have a short look on two Russian companies, and then go to Colombia and present the main findings of the coal mining situation in Colombia. So maybe I'll just stop talking and hand over to Vladimir because we before we run out of time. Thanks, Vladimir, for joining us. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. And I apologize for because I will have to leave 6:30 for an important meeting. But you can still leave your questions after I'm leaving, and I will respond it later if you like. So, Sebastian, if we can show a couple of first pictures, that would be great. Russia is the third largest exporter of coal and one of the big producers of coal. Annually, there is about 350 or a little more million tons of coal produced in Russia every year. And roughly about half of it exported to different countries, both West and East. Biggest producers are SUEK, KRU, Kuzbass, SDS, and a couple of others. My organization started to work on a coal mining and coal issues in general about 5 years ago in the Kuzbass region. Here you can see one of the pictures in the Kuzbass region, but well, there are many open pit mines like this. And if you ever travel to Kuzbass, you will be able to see it from a plane. The next one as well. The most of the coal mined at the open pit mines, over 70% at the moment. And that's a big difference from what we used to have in the Soviet period of time when the most of the coal was mined underground. And of course, the open pit mining brings a lot of additional environmental damage. When we look into statistics on air pollution, it's very high. Kuzbass would usually be included in every ratings done in Russia on the air quality. Kuzbass would be in top 5 or in top 3 necessarily. Of course, there is because there is a lot of open pit mining and a lot of explosions happening all across the region. It's extremely polluted air in the region, which connected, of course, to many diseases. When we look into medical statistics in the region, we can see that well, they've got all those diseases related to lungs, all of them several times above the Russian average. There is also very very bad situation with rate of diseases related to women reproductive health. Also, different diseases related to newborn kids, and also a number of dead kids born is very high in the region. Probably the biggest reason for this is extremely high air pollution. Sebastian, if we can move to a black snow picture. Yeah, now the next one. No. Yeah, that's usual during winter in the region when the snow becomes black. And of course, that demonstrates very clear how much of a pollution and a coal dust in the air, because when the snow falls, it becomes immediately black because there is a lot of coal dust in the air. Can you, Sebastian, can you get the previous picture, please? It's it's kind of probably hard to imagine for many people, but open pit mines, not always outside of towns or villages in the region. This map is it's a satellite picture of Kiselyovsk city, and here in winter, it's white because it's snow, but the black. Black part of a picture, it's a coal dust, and it's because the open pit mines located right inside of the city, like in the center of the city. There would be several coal mines that would be active, and so it's just picture from another angle of a black snow, and inside of it city, and it's happening every winter there, but unfortunately it's not like covered all the time by international media. The last year there was a lot of coverage for black snow. There was some kind of people were, let's say, very much surprised that black snow exists, and it was in media, in the big newspapers all across the world. But this year it's been happening many times, of course, just like every winter, and there was almost no coverage by media. But the local people say clearly that black snow is not something unusual because the pollution of air is very high in the region. Well, the black snow is something usual for them. Also, there is a actually terrible situation with the drinking water, even when it comes to our governmental statistics. And it's probably important to mention that in Russia, when statistics comes from the government, we usually think it has smaller numbers compared to reality. But probably not in this case, because according to a local government in Kuzbass, the over 90% of the sources of drinking water in the region polluted, and mostly because of a coal mining. Basically we can say there is no clean water in the region, which of course affect health of the local population very much. Sebastian, can you move like to the end, like to the last picture? Yeah, the next one. The next one. Thank you very much. No. Here I got several pictures for you of different protests that happening in the region. It's important to understand that a situation in Kuzbass was not always like this. Well, I mean, the coal mining exists for quite a long time in the region, but the environmental situation got much worse, especially during last decade, when the number of open pit mines, the new mines that they opened around the region, started to grow very fast. And that is because the prices for coal been growing, and a lot of business companies in Russia decided it's a good idea to make money on coal because other countries buy it very good and pay good money. So the over last decade situation was worsening, and that led to establishing of a local environmental protest movement. Before 2016, in the Kuzbass region, there was not a single environmental protest in history. I mean, other kinds of protests, like economic ones, when somebody didn't get salary in time, that was happening in the past quite often in Russia. But environmental protests been never happened before 2016. But since 2016, we registered about 50 actions of a protest. People got very active because environmental situation was getting worse and worse and worse. And here you can see, well, different examples, mostly villages, where people go to protest and demand local coal mines to be closed, obviously because of a contamination of water and air, but also because it's quite often happening in the Kuzbass that open pit mine opened in 5 or 7 or 10 kilometers away from the closest village. And people, at first, people think, well, there is not big, well, it's not a big problem. It's very far from us. But then in several years, the open pit mine would reach the closest village. And this is when people would start to feel explosions 24 hours a day, when the big, these huge cars transporting the huge trucks transporting a lot of coal through villages and basically destroying local roads, and problems coming along with the coal mining to villages. That's probably the main reason why people in different villages got active. At the moment, the movement is growing, even if last year was extremely intensive in terms of repression, and the local government started to organize a lot of pressure on the local activists trying to stop protests in the region, because number of protests is growing, but they couldn't really stop activism. It's only growing, and more villages joining protest movement. Right now, I think the protests happening around more or less 15 to 20 villages in the Kuzbass. And I think the main reason why people getting more and more active, it's because environmental situation getting worse and worse. And of course, that happens thanks to the biggest producers of coal, most of all, like SUEK or Kuzbass Razrez Ugal. That's pretty much what's been happening in the Kuzbass. Oh, the also important thing to mention that Kuzbass is so-called mono region. That's expression that we have in Russia. That means that local economy almost entirely dependent on coal mining and coal production. Well, there are other types of local businesses exist, of course, but it all relatively small when you compare to coal mining, because, well, in this region, a lot of big coal companies and those one of the biggest in the world coal producers located and working and having a lot of both open pit and underground mines. So that's basically, I think, in general, situation that we've got. And I think here I would invite you to ask questions.
Please, if you have any questions, just post them into the chat. We have no questions so far. Should we?
So
Well,
if there are no questions so far, then maybe we can, I can share another presentation, which I will use later.
Yeah, but well, anyway, if there would be more questions in the end after Sebastian's presentation, please feel free to leave questions for me, and I will respond it in written form later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. And maybe you can just add a few sentences that could be interesting, I think, about the work of Ecodefense in Kuzbass and the situation of Ecodefense in general. How is it for you or for other activists who work in the region? Is it easy to get information, or is it very difficult to work on the ground there?
Well, in most of the cases, it's very hard to get the information on the current situation with pollution. Also because the local government is not very open in giving information. Well, coal companies, of course, is coal industry is the main taxpayer in Kuzbass. And of course, local government, well, we can say likes to protest the interest of a coal industry because they think region is very much dependent on coal industry. As I mentioned already, the repression against civil society groups in the Kuzbass was pretty much growing last year. We registered over 10 different cases when pressure was put on the organizers of a protest in Kuzbass. And my organization exists since 1989 in Russia, and we started to work on coal about 5 years ago. A part of the work we do is investigating, getting information from different sources, publishing reports on situation with contamination of water or air quality, also on situation with the civil society activism. We now actually preparing the new report that would be focused on repression against activists in the region. That what basically outlining what's been happening last year. We also prepare a new report, which will be out, I think, around early May on current situation, the environmental situation, air quality, water quality, and everything else. It will be out in May. If any of you likes to get our new report with fresh information on environmental quality and diseases and protests and basically outlining what's happening in Kuzbass today, feel free to let me know. I will send it to you in May when we complete the new report. My organization, Ecodefense, has been under very big pressure from a Russian government, especially since 2014, when Russian government did put us on the list of foreign agents. That's a special law in Russia that's designed to, that's designed to make it troubles for those who criticizing government. And now all major environmental and human rights groups that working in Russia, I mean the Russian ones, not the foreign ones, they all are on the foreign agent list. And because we got included to foreign agent list, it led to the opening of 5 criminal cases against my colleague Alexandra Koroleva last year. So she had to ask for political asylum in Germany because otherwise she would get to jail. And she successfully obtained political asylum status in Germany. So she's now working from Germany. I mean, over the last 5-6 years, Russian government started over 30 court cases against Ecodefense, my organization, and most of those cases we lost. We've been fined many times, and the total amount of fines we got from Russian courts was about 30,000 euro. Russian government decided to freeze our bank account back in December 2018. So that's basically what's happening with the active environmental groups in Russia if they dare to criticize governmental policies in field of energy like coal or nuclear that we also work on. That's pretty much our situation at the moment.
Thank you, Vladimir. I think that's extremely helpful to understand the current situation in Russia, especially when energy companies say that they know how the situation looks like or that they have checked their suppliers. I think it's really helpful to get more insight into the real situation on the ground. Thank you very much. I understand that you have to leave now, so I will just continue then with the next presentation. And yeah, if there are any questions, you can write them directly to us, to my email address, sebastian@urgewald.org, and I will forward them to Vladimir. And I think you will hear more about Russian coal also in the upcoming weeks and months at different shareholder meetings and hopefully also in bilateral meetings where we can then discuss these things a bit further.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm leaving now.
Okay, thank you, Vladimir. Okay, so I will just start the next presentation then. Because when we talk about the coal supply chain, then I can say that I'm working on this topic for more than 10 years now. And so most of the things that I will say about especially Colombia are things that are partly or completely known for all these years. I personally have confronted Uniper and the predecessor company E.ON with these claims before. And so I will give you a short overlook about the current situation and then about some of the companies in particular, and also about the, let's call it, the lack of speed in the progress. So one very big problem from the very beginning has always been that there is no real transparency in the supply chain when it comes to coal. Here you can see the big port in Rotterdam, which is the coal port where a lot of the coal that's burned in Germany comes from. It's one of several coal hubs in Europe. And the way how coal is traded, there are several ways how coal is traded. One is that you have the direct trade relationship between an energy company and a coal supplier. Then you have the screen trade, where you just buy via screen particular coal shipments. And what's also important to know is that in many cases, coal is not used, let's say, from a single mine, but it's blended to fulfill the requirements of the different companies. This has, in the past and also until today, is used as an excuse to not further submit information about the origin. We have seen some improvements, which I will speak about right now, but it's still, many companies are still very reluctant to give more or to make more transparent their coal supply chain. If we have a look at Fortum, then the situation is as such that Fortum sourced almost 1.8 million tons of coal in 2018. And this is positive, they have for the first time mentioned their main suppliers where they have direct business relationships with. They've also said the countries of origin, so the coal for their coal plants in Finland, but also for the Russian ones comes, or for the Polish ones comes from Russia, Poland, and Kazakhstan. And they've mentioned the suppliers Suwek, which Vladimir has already mentioned before, Majkub and Komir, Polska Grupa Górnicza, K-Proben and Kuzbass Razres Ugol. And there it's important to know that Kuzbass Razres Ugol is the second biggest coal company in Russia, and it has a trading company which is called Carbo One. And Fortum is directly sourcing coal via Carbo One as well. We'll just switch to go to the next one. If we have a look at Uniper, then the numbers are, of course, a lot higher, but Uniper is definitely less transparent than Fortum is. They just gave the number that they purchased or traded 17.4 million tons in 2018. The countries of origin of their coal were Russia, 29%, Colombia, 22%, the US with 20%, and then there's South Africa and other countries with 6% and 7%, and 15% where they say it's unknown. We cannot really say where this coal is coming from. If asked about their suppliers, at least their direct suppliers, they do not specify it at all. In an answer that they gave to us, Uniper said, our contractual relationships with individual companies are subject to mutual confidentiality obligations. This is to ensure competitors cannot draw any strategic conclusions from our market behavior. We've heard this answer from several energy companies in the past. And in the end, I had access to several business newsletters where you can get very detailed information about the coal supply and the coal trading, also who is sourcing from which supplier, and it's not a big secret at all. So several companies have changed this policy. As an example, you can take Vattenfall, who were also very intransparent some years ago, but then they said, okay, we will at least submit or make transparent our direct suppliers for the last 3 years. This is something that we've demanded also from other energy companies, but Uniper until today is not willing to do that. The only specification they gave was that they had a direct supply of almost 10 million tons and traded via screen trade some 7.8 million tons. Before I come to Colombia, I just wanted to show this map to better understand what Vladimir was talking about. This shows what you see there marked is the Kuznets Basin. So all the coal that we source here in Western Europe from Russia, almost all the coal comes from that region, which means that before it is used in a coal plant in Finland or in a coal plant in Germany, or maybe also in the coal plant Datteln 4 in the future, it will travel more than 4,000 kilometers to the power plant, almost 4,000 kilometers to the nearest port, all by rail. About the companies that were mentioned by Fortum before, there's Kuzbass Razres Ugol Carbo One, and if you have a closer look at this company, or if you do some online research on them, then you quickly find articles about a scandal that were published last year. There was also a very large documentary on Swedish television, which was mainly a documentary about Swedbank, about a Swedish bank. And the accusation was that Swedbank had transferred a huge sums of money via accounts of Carbo One to dubious clients, or to the main owner of Kuzbass Razores Ugol, which is the Russian oligarch Iskandar Mahmudov. In this documentary, there's also a Spanish prosecutor interviewed who directly tied Mr. Mahmudov to organized crime. So the question here at this point is, if Fortum is sourcing coal from this company, how did they check if it's a acceptable business relationship or not? I have asked this question several times to Fortum, but they still lack an answer. I can provide the links to these articles. Unfortunately, the television documentary is no longer online, but maybe it's possible to get access if you directly contact the Swedish television SVT. In short, if you continue to have a look at what kind of business partner is Carbo One, then you have Kuzbass Razores Ugol in Russia, and Carbo One is the trading company for Kuzbass Razores Ugol. Carbo One is based on Cyprus. It's registered on Cyprus, and if you do some online research, you'll find out that Carbo One is registered, or is a subsidiary of a company called Invalent Ventures Limited. And Invalent Ventures Limited is based on the British Virgin Islands, but it's really hard to find any more detailed information about Invalent Ventures, a website, anything. You can have a look and you won't find anything. So the question is it possible that this company is involved in tax evasion and money laundering, etc., etc.? And it's very interesting to read these articles online, and maybe Fortum or Uniper, who both do business with Carbo One and Kuzbass Razores Ugol, can give a convincing answer about this case. Fortum has also mentioned that they trade coal with, or that they buy coal from a company called Caproben, which, according to the sources that I've seen, is registered in Switzerland. And there's also an interesting article online from last year, which is called "Why Blood Coal is Critical for Russian Success in Ukraine." And this article directly links the company to some money laundering activities between Ukraine, Russia, and the British Virgin Islands, because the accusation is that Caproben is taking coal from the eastern parts of Ukraine, from the Donetsk and Lugansk area, bringing it to Russia, then rebranding it as like Russian coal, or coal from Kuzbass maybe also, and then selling it to the European market. Here, this is the same. I would really like to hear from Fortum what they have to say about this business relationship, and if they have checked comprehensively the origin and the situation around Caproben, which is also, by the way, has a parent company registered on the British Virgin Islands. This having said, I would like to switch over to Colombia, which is at the moment not relevant for Finland because, or for Fortum, because Fortum is not sourcing coal from Colombian companies, even though I'm not sure if in the past they have sourced from Colombia when they still had more coal plants running. It would be interesting to hear. In Colombia, there's like two big coal mining regions. One is located in the region La Guajira, where we have the big mine from Cerrejón, and the other one is the Cesar region, which you can see here both on the map. It's a bit older, the map, so the names of the ports have changed a bit because they have new ports, but it's the best map I could find so quickly. And from these two regions, almost 90–95% of the Colombian coal is extracted, and almost everything of the coal of that region goes into the export. So it's really an extractive industry, you can say. To give you an impression how this looks like, even though this is also a bit of an older picture, but this is a picture from the Cerrejón open pit mine. There you can see how big the dimensions of these mines are. And they are connected, like in Russia, with all kinds of environmental problems. There is very high dust pollution in the areas. We have water problems, etc., etc. And especially when we talk about water, then, and I will just switch back, you have to know that La Guajira is like a semi-desertic region, so they have huge problems with the access to water. Even Cerrejón admits that. And my question here is it really acceptable to do coal mining, which needs huge amounts of water in a region where water is a very, very scarce resource? Around the mine, we have several communities affected. The biggest river of the whole department is almost passing through the mine. There have been plans in the past to relocate it. They abstained from it. They changed the plans, but there are other rivers that have been relocated or are it's still planned to relocate them. And the people affected in the region are mostly Wayu indigenous people. So what kind of progress does coal mining bring to that region? And especially what will happen if the coal demand will fall in the future? Who will pay the price for coal mining? Despite the fact that coal mining in that region started more than 30 years ago, it's still one of the poorest regions in the country. So La Guajira has not really benefited from coal mining, or there is no real improvement that we can see here. Even though this is a very old case, I will show it again. It's about the forced displacement of the community of Tabaco. That happened almost 20 years ago. And believe it or not, there is still no new community of Tabaco. For years, we have heard from Cerrejón that it's not their fault anymore, that they have done all they had to do, but that is the authorities from the region who do not fulfill with their obligations. But from my perspective, if people get forcibly displaced from their area, then the company who's responsible for this, because they claim the land for their mining operations, has to do a lot more than just saying, okay, we did our part and now it's up to the others. This is a huge injustice that this is still going on. We have seen several other problems with relocations, very, very badly held negotiations with the affected people. We have seen resettled communities where after a short period of time, they already had problems with their housing, with the productive, or with their generation of income, which didn't really work. So it wasn't really, they didn't change to the better when they had to leave their land. In the other region, in the Cesar region, it's even worse. We have, in the last years, we have mainly focused on that region with our work because of the connection to the armed conflict. Here you also get an impression of how coal mining, of the dimensions of coal mining in Colombia. And in that region, you also have resettlement problems. This is the El Hatillo community. It's a, I have to admit, it's an old picture, but El Hatillo was, should have been resettled since many years. There has been an order from the Colombian authorities to several mining companies, including the ones that are relevant for the European coal sourcing, to relocate this and two other communities. That was in 2010. And now we have 2020, and they're still not resettled. There have been many problems with this resettlement, with the action plans, etc. And even though the energy companies, the European energy companies and the mining companies frequently claim that there are huge, huge progress has been made, yeah, the situation is as such that 10 years after this order, El Hatillo is still not resettled. And I really wonder how many more years do they want to take to resettle this community. But what was the worst the worst thing happening in the region where there's a connection to coal mining was the armed conflict. I mean, the armed conflict in Colombia has happened all over the place, all over the country, but especially in the regions where we saw extraction of resources like coal, oil, gold, or other raw materials. This is a picture of one of the fighters of the Bloque Norte, of the northern block of the self-defense units, the so-called paramilitaries, and they were active in the coal mining region. There is a very telling report from the Dutch colleagues from Pax for Peace, which is from 2014, who investigated the situation in the mining region of Cesar. And they came up with this report, which in short said that there was a particular paramilitary union, the Juan Andres Alvarez Front, which was financed, allegedly, I have to say, allegedly financed by the mining companies. Not only by the mining companies, but by two mining companies, Drummond and Prodeco, and maybe also huge landowners and other economic forces of the region. This unit, the Juan Andres Alvarez Front, is made responsible, or is responsible for more than 3,100 killings, more than 55,000 displaced people, and for more than 240 forced disappearances, which means that people just disappeared, and until today we don't know where they are. All this happened in the period of 1996 to 2006, so also the period where the mining activities in the region were expanding quite a lot, because one of the companies, Drummond from the United States, started at the early 90s, and the other one, Prodeco, which is now owned by Glencore, started a little bit later, but was also present there during all the time of this violence. Here you can have a closer look at the region and the numbers. This is taken from the report. They show the massacres where several people got killed at the time. And you can see the mining concessions in the center, and you can see the massacres all around. So not all of these massacres are linked to the mining activities as such. But of course, if the mining companies, and this is claimed, or there are several testimonies under oath from former paramilitary leaders who say, we received payments from the mining companies to protect the railroad and to protect the mining concessions. If this is true, then of course they have a responsibility also for the killings that have taken place all around. Even in the best case, even if we would say, who knows if they were really responsible, because of course it's really hard to finally prove if and how the money was paid, because of course they did not get a receipt from the paramilitaries, which we can find now. But even in that case, we've always claimed that, of course, the mining companies have benefited from the violence in the region, and this is the situation until today, because we see that in the region we have very weakened trade unions, we have a very weakened civil society. The communities really fear to speak out publicly because there is still violence going on, and whenever you raise your voice too much, you still run the risk of getting killed. Here you can see the mining concessions again. When I say these, that we have many testimonies under oath, these came up after the demobilization of the paramilitaries in 2006. There was a special law in Colombia, the Law for Justice and Peace, where the people, or the former paramilitary leaders could tell their version of the crimes. And several of them said, yeah, we we have killed people, we have done these crimes, but yeah, there were people behind who gave us the money, and they explicitly mentioned Drummond and Prodeco. We've spoken a lot about numbers, so I would like to show you some pictures that we have already used years ago, also to confront Uniper with this, because these victims, all of these victims have names. This is, for example, John is Snyder Parada Gomez, and this photo was taken at the river where his father was thrown into. His father was murdered by the paramilitary groups. He's still waiting for justice. On this photo, you see the sisters Elizabeth Adenovis and Wendy Cogoyo, and their brother was killed in 1997. Or on this photo, you see Edilza Barreto, who holds the identity card of her son, who was also murdered. This is Auden Portillo, who was displaced with his family. And I mean, all these people, all these victims still wait for justice, wait for a fair remedy process until today. One very last picture, this is Leonida Ariza. At the end of 2001, her son was forcibly displaced by the paramilitaries, and she doesn't know anything about her son. When we started to discuss this with the energy companies, then in many cases they pointed towards Bettercoal, an initiative founded in 2012. It's an industry initiative which was founded to deal with the coal supply chain, to make it more responsible. I mean, this is, as you can see in the logo, they're working towards a global responsible coal supply chain. This is what they say. And now, after I think 6 or 7 years, they have created 2 working groups on Colombia and Russia. In the previous years, we have discussed a lot with them why they do not focus more on these human rights violations that I've just spoken about. And at the beginning, they always said, no, we have a forward-looking approach, and this is violence of the past, and the Colombian government has to deal with that. I strongly disagree, because I think the mining companies, but also the companies who have benefited from the cheap Colombian coal in all these years, cannot give all the responsibility or delegate all the responsibility to the Colombian government. They themselves have a responsibility for their supply chain and for what has happened in the region. I said at the beginning that I fear that we really have a problem of speed here, because even if there are some slight improvements with Bettercoal, with the current speed of the initiative, I think we'll never get anywhere, because even now they say, okay, we want to strengthen the dialogue in Colombia, and then let's see where we can get, etc., etc. But so far, my impression is that Bettercoal has mainly been used to be like an excuse, like a greenwashing tool for the companies to delegate their responsibility. And I mean, another problem that even Bettercoal will face very quickly is that the most progressive companies, the companies who get out of coal very quickly, like Iberdrola and Naturgy, they have already left Bettercoal. And there are more companies. Here you can see a list of the current members of Bettercoal. There are even more companies who will, leave Bettercoal quite soon, I guess. And so it was designed as the initiative to solve these problems. It hasn't solved the problems until today, and I really doubt that it will solve any of the mentioned problems in the future. If we welcome the information that they can give, but for now, I don't think that we get too far. Uniper and Fortum both claim that their way to solve the problems is mainly via Bettercoal. They have repeatedly said that. And in the last reports that are publicly available from Uniper, they say that they purchase 46% of their total coal from suppliers that have signed up to the Bettercoal Code of Conduct. So while they say that Bettercoal is their vehicle to solve the problems, they do not even buy half of their coal from these suppliers. So how do they check the other ones? This is a huge question, and with Fortum it looks almost similar, because they claimed on their website that in 2018 they purchased 54% of coal from suppliers whose mines have been subjected to a Bettercoal assessment. Just as a last sentence about these assessments, the Colombian suppliers have all been assessed. Cerrejón has been assessed, Prodeco has been assessed, Drummond has been assessed. And if you have a look at the public reports that are available on the Bettercoal website, then you get the impression, wow, they are almost perfect, because these public reports look really positive, that they really fulfill almost all the requirements of Bettercoal. This is a bit strange if at the same time you take into account what I've just said, all these problems of human rights violations, of water, of environmental damage, etc., of problems with the communities and so forth. And even if there's a public report about an assessment, and there has been one about a Russian supplier called SDS, which looked much more negative than the Colombian ones, there are no real consequences, because there are still Bettercoal suppliers. There's this, they have these improvement plans which are not publicly available. So who knows what Bettercoal is really doing? And this is what we have to take into account when we talk about the current coal use and trade of the companies Fortum and Uniper. And this is the kind of coal that might be used also in the Datteln 4 power plant if it goes online. Okay, I'll leave it here. If there are any questions, then you're welcome to ask questions. And thank you for your attention.